Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Seiko watch's SPB049 wristwatch. Unfortunately, that's its name. There's not like a fancy name for it or anything like that. The Seiko Grand Tonneau or the Tonneau Fun. Actually, I like that one. This is going to be the Tonneau Fun. I guess it's got a Tonneau case. No? Okay, anyways. First off, though, before I go any further, I want to thank Lewis Jewelers of Ann Arbor, Michigan here. I happen to have their cleaning cloth on my table. They have been my Seiko AD as well as my AD for a bunch of other brands, Omega, Breitling, whatever, for a good long time, and they could be yours as well. Just talk to DK, tell them Nick Shabazz sent you. They'll hook you up with some promotional pricing, but anyways, they loaned this guy along. I told them, as always, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly, might be a gem, might be junk. They did still send it along, but nonetheless, actually, well, yeah, it's factory fresh. And as a result, by the way, this is a quick review. I didn't get a chance to wear this for months and months or anything like that, but nonetheless, I think I can say some things about the nature of the piece. Next thing, let's do some size measurements on it. This is an interestingly sized watch because, you know, it is only 40 wide, including the crown. If we actually get rid of the crown, we're looking at closer to 34 millimeter here. The lug-to-lug length on it is also pretty reasonable at about 44 millimeters, so it's not a huge watch. In terms of thickness, though, it's surprisingly thick. If we measure this guy up, we have a thickness here around 13 millimeters, 12.8, something in that vicinity. And then the strap width on this guy is looking like, yeah, about 20 millimeter strap width. So you can use any 20 millimeter strap from the looks of it, and that's a beautiful thing. And aside from that, let's just go on ahead and jump into it and talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly of this very interesting little watch right here. So on the good side, to start with, this is a Seiko watch, and it's using a very well-known Seiko movement, the 6R15 movement. This is one of Seiko's slightly higher-end pieces. It's not like full-on Grand Seiko high-end, but it is a well-done movement here. It has hacking, meaning that when I pull the crown all the way out, it stops. Amazing. And it is hand winding as well, meaning that in its base position here, there's no screw down crown on it for what it's worth. When you turn this, the watch winds itself, right? Well, I guess you're winding the watch. It's not doing much to itself. But nonetheless, it hand winds as well. It has a date function here, and it has a quick set feature. And because it's 9 a.m. rather than 9 p.m., I can use that. And so I can change the date very rapidly. If you, for instance, take it off your wrist for a couple of days, no problem there. The power reserve on this guy is about 50 hours, is what they were advertising. And the movement itself is going at about 3 times a second, 3 hertz. And it is a very solid movement, meaning what I mean by that is that it's a well-known movement. It's a very common one in Seiko's lineup, and that's that's great. That means if you take this to any Seiko jeweler, and by the way, this is less clear than you might expect because there is a decal on the back of it there, but nonetheless, you can see the movement up inside there. It's a well-known Seiko movement, and any Seiko competent watchmaker will be able to work with it. So that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, crystal on this guy. This is a sapphire crystal on this guy, but more specifically, it's a pretty one because the sapphire on this guy is not just a normal sapphire crystal. No, in fact, it has a little bit of, well, I mean, it is normal sapphire, but it's got a little bit of prominence up above the case here. I'll zoom in and see if I can capture that a little bit better, but yeah, see right there. That's nice. That little bit of extra faceting there looks good. And in fact, the watch itself looks very good at this kind of level of detail here. That little bit of extra sapphire prominence is a very nice thing. Next thing on this guy, the strap on it is actually quite nice. It's an alligator leather, at least that's what they're saying on their website. You know, I didn't check the DNA or anything like that, but it sure looks alligatory. So at the very least, it seems like a fair allegation. Okay, that was really bad. And it comes on a deployant style clasp. What I mean by that is that it's not a tang buckle sort of thing. Instead, the clasp itself has this little guy that just makes it easy to reduce the wear and tear on the strap, and you can adjust it to whatever size you would like to see it fit, right? It works quite well. There, you just slide this little guy into whichever of these holes works, and then you just keep it adjusted. And that allows you to quickly adjust it if you need to, but it's a relatively good strap. And so I appreciate that very much. Next thing, this guy does have an open case back, which allows us to see the movement in a little bit more detail right there. See right there, there's the balance wheel going back and forth. You can see the mainspring back there. In fact, I bet if I wind the watch, of course that moves. But if I wind the watch, you should be able to see it underneath the mainspring there. There you go. See that top wheel moving? Yeah, that's me winding the watch right now. So that's cool. So you do get to see that open case back, which reveals some of the magic of a mechanical watch, which I appreciate very much. Next thing, this guy has an enamel dial. And I have to say, I am quite enameled of it. Okay. What I mean by that is that this is not just a painted white dial. In fact, this is a melted glass put onto a ceramic dial. And that is actually quite cool. And it's cool in a couple of different ways, but one of the ways, apparently it's quite a pain in the neck to have be a thing, but one of the ways that it's cool is that it adds a little bit of dimensionality. If I put a little bit of side light on this guy, here, what you should be able to see, there's an angle that you get this at, and I'm trying to find it. But there is an angle at which you see some of the dimensionality of that. There we go. You can see a little bit of the shifts in the contouring of the dial there as a result of the enamel. This is really hard to have show up on camera. Maybe a dimmer light from a more oblique angle. The product photography, it turns out, is very, very difficult. But anyways, there is an element of dimensionality to it, and the paint itself, well, the enamel itself, for the markers and the indices, has itself a little bit of prominence there too, which is nice. So it's got just an interesting bit of dimensionality, and in the sunlight, it can be quite nice. And the other nice thing about it is because it's glass on ceramic, it's not going to disappear, it's not going to fade, it's not going to chip off. That's a beautiful thing. And so this is a full enamel dial watch, and actually this is relatively inexpensive for a full enamel watch, even though it's a pretty pricey watch, coming in around $1,100 retail. For enamel, that's not so expensive. So I appreciate that very much, and to me, all that is the good, is that it's got an enamel dial, an open case back, a nice strap, a sapphire crystal, and a Seiko 6R15 movement, which is a solid, good-to-go sort of thing. I guess you could also comment on the overall polish over here. This is quite nice as well. Really reflects the Batman mask nicely in the fading evening light, so to speak. So, on the great side, this guy has a very nice look to it. The thing that actually made this guy jump out at me from the case, so to speak, is the shape of it. You don't get that as often. This is a Tonneau case. That's Tonneau. It is a very specific case shape, and you'll see it elsewhere in the watch world, but it's French for barrel, by the way, like a barrel of oil, I guess. That's probably wine is what they would prefer. It's a French term, but nonetheless, it's that. It's got the enamel dial to it. It's got this nice handset with the lunette and everything like that at the very end of the seconds hand. And by the way, it's worth pointing out that under the right light, although it's a little bit difficult to get it there, again, under artificial light, what you see is that the handset on this guy is actually blue. It is a very dark blue, but in the right sunlight, you can actually get a little bit of that blue out of it. And coupled with these numerals, this ends up looking like a very, very classy watch, or it ends up being a very classy watch because it looks like it. Funny how that works. So anyways, and coupled with the strap and the deploy and everything, this is just a really classy little piece here. Absolutely a gorgeous watch, and I can see it blending in very well with basically any high-end formal sort of look. So to me, that's what's great here, is that this is just a very attractive watch with this Tonneau case, the enamel dial, the handset, the numerals. It's just a beautiful thing. On the bad side, okay, to start with, it has some of the normal sins the address watches. The water resistance is not great. It's 50 meters, and that may sound like a lot, but basically that means you want to avoid water while you're wearing this. Mind you, it's on a leather strap. I don't know that you're going to be diving with it anyways, but yeah, 5-bar water resist isn't so amazing. Let's be real here. It also has no lume at all on this guy. If I, charge the lume up on this, you see here that there is nothing. So as a result, especially because the hands are not particularly reflective, low light readability is not going to be super good with this guy. And so that's a thing. Next thing, this bugs me particularly, but I don't know that it bugs anybody else. This has one of those deployant clasps where the tongue of the strap is hanging off the side, as opposed to the nicer ones where it kind of tucks in back behind the strap, where the end of the strap comes up inside. I don't prefer this particular style. Maybe they're a little classier in some circles or something. And by the way, it almost feels like it's backwards, because the tongue of the strap comes actually towards you on this. But hey, whatever. It is what it is. But I'm not necessarily a big fan of the tongue hanging out deployment clasps. Doesn't do it for me. But whatever. That's bias. Next thing, the movement on this guy. Like I said, it's a very effective movement, but it is not a super decorated movement, if you will. This is not a movement that is particularly like, oh my God, attractive. They've done a little basic bit of finishing, but this is largely an unfinished movement in a watch that could be a good deal fancier. That could be, they could have really ratcheted that up a little bit with that open case back, and they didn't, and that's a little bit disappointing to me. I'd like to see a little bit more of a figured movement at this kind of a price point. Next thing, like I mentioned, the hands on this guy, they are actually a blue color. And yeah, there we go. Just got a little hint of that blue out of there. But the thing is, it requires a very specific light angle to hit and light color as well, I think, to hit. But you can definitely get it in there. But unfortunately, it ends up feeling a little bit more like black hands most of the time. And more importantly, it ends up feeling a little painty. It's not like, for instance, a high-polished blued hand where it's a beautiful reflective surface that reflects everything a little bluer. This ends up feeling like, oh, they just put some blue substance on the hands. I'm sure there is a fancy, this blue color paint was passed down from generations of samurai or something like that they've got fancy marketing for it. But in practice, it doesn't end up feeling as impressive as some of the blued hands that I've seen in other brands, whatever. Not a huge deal. Next thing, the price on this guy is a little bit high. It's $1,100. Now look, it's an enamel dial. That's actually relatively inexpensive for an enamel dial. They tend to be very expensive there. You're not going to see enamel that much cheaper, but still there are much less expensive ways to get into a nice looking dress watch. So if you're just looking at this going like, hey, I need a good dress watch, this is a great choice, obviously, but it's not, it's not a cheap one, that's for damn sure. You can probably do better than retail, by the way, so talk to your AD. Or failing that, talk to mine. Louis Jewelers, DK will hook you up. But still, this is a very pricey piece, and that's something you got to keep in mind. Then finally, on the bad side, this guy is actually relatively thick. That was my very first impression of it, is just like, whoa, that's beefy. And the problem with that on a dress watch is that very often shirt cuffs, especially for dressier shirts, are not, well, they're not exactly meant for really thick watches. It's not really thick. I mean, I've definitely, there are much thicker watches. I'm wearing one as we speak, but at the same time, that was a little bit surprising to me that the watch ended up being so thick while at the same time being, so dressy. So that's definitely something you want to keep in mind. And if thick watches bother you, this is going to bother you. So to me, at least, that's what's bad here, is that it's relatively thick. It's pretty pricey. The hands aren't mind-blowing. The movement is pretty much undecorated. The deployment has the tongue hanging out the side, and there's no lume and no water resistance, but it's a dress watch. On the ugly front, the one thing, and I always drag Seiko for this, and it's always a little better than I sound, but still, Seiko publishes accuracy specs for their movements, right? They say they will guarantee that this watch will run between 25 on the positive, like plus 25 or minus 15 seconds per day. That is their guaranteed range. Anything outside that, they will repair the watch. The thing is, plus 25 seconds a day for $1,100? No. Now, the thing is, I hear the comments, oh my God, Nick, come on. Seiko does tend to underpromise and overdeliver. Generally, these are much better. In fact, this one is much closer to 5 seconds a day or so. But at the same time, and again, that's not measured on the wrist, but just, in multiple positions, etc. But nonetheless, they really should be doing better than that. They should be guaranteeing a much nicer specification for an $1,100 watch than they're doing here. Because honestly, if I bought an $1,100 watch and it's running 25 seconds a day off the factory shelf, that's ugly. That's going to be a nope for me. So I'm not a big fan of the accuracy spec, and I really hope that at certain points Seiko decides, we have to try, and really, ups that spec and really ups their standards for accuracy there. So to me, that's what's ugly, is that Seiko tends to give embarrassingly bad specifications for accuracy, even if they tend to do a little bit better in practice. Final conclusion, though, this is a really classy looking watch. I like this thing a lot. I showed this to my wife. She was like, oh, that's nice. It's got a solid movement, a very nice crystal. It's got a very nice strap, a good case, an enamel dial. All of this adds up to being a very nice, classy look. There's not a whole lot to say that's about this watch other than, oh, that's pretty. Mind you, there's no lume, there's no strong water resistance. The deployant clasp is a little strange. The hands aren't super amazing. The movement isn't figured. The price is high, and it is a little oddly thick for a dress watch, but mostly it's a very nice and classy piece. Like I said, you can get a classy watch for a lot less money than this, but if you want the enamel, You really can't. And if you're after this kind of a case with a good, reliable movement and a couple of other niceties, this is a very reasonable choice. And so ultimately, this one is going to come down to your style, as well as your budget. You know, how much do you value a case shape that's a little off the beaten path, a dial that's a little bit off the beaten path, a look that is overall very, very classy, and just overall pretty damn good execution here. If you're loving if you're loving the watch and you've got cash to spare, though, I think that this little guy could absolutely be a ton of fun in your collection. Okay, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.